Today's art history lecture will cover the art of the Olmec culture. This is thought to be one of the oldest civilizations known in Mesoamerica. It's thought of as a mother culture, and they have these really amazing works of art that we'll dive into today. So I have a little outline of what we'll cover in our lecture, starting with the beginnings of Mesoamerican cultures. We'll look at the stylistic qualities of Olmec art, some of their colossal sculptures, talk a bit about their emphasis on sculpture, portraiture, the human face, the important locations on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and some of the different areas of ceremonial centers that they would actually travel to go visit. Then we'll talk a little bit about their ceramic and jade tradition and some of the influence on neighboring cultures and also the following cultures in Mesoamerica that may have borrowed quite a bit from the Olmec culture. So the Olmec exist in this time period, which is known as the pre-classic or the formative. Remember that these are chronological markers. They're kind of flexible dates, with classic being the so-called height of the Maya Empire, and post-classic being after that, and pre-classic or formative preceding that. So the Olmec culture was in its height between around 1200 BCE and around 400 BCE. We have a chart in your textbook on page 278 that shows this timeline of the Olmec and how they overlap with some of these other cultures that we'll be looking at this semester as well. So some of the stylistic qualities that we'll see today in Olmec art include interest in rendering naturalistic human forms. We see that especially with jade masks, ceramic figurines, the colossal head sculptures. We see presence of baby-like figures and also adult figures holding these kind of supernatural baby-type figures. We also see transformational animal-human figures and really incredible works of art in jade, stone, and ceramic. We even see some of the first pyramidal structures in Mesoamerica here, and ritual centers of architecture arranged on bilaterally symmetrical layouts. We also know that the Olmecs had a writing and number system. However, we will not really dive super deeply into that as it has not been fully deciphered yet. But these are some contributions that the Olmec have brought to art history in Mesoamerica specifically. One thing that the Olmec culture is very famous for is their high degree of naturalism when it comes to representing human faces and human forms. So I want to just take a moment to define that term of naturalism. So in art, when we're looking at art of any culture or any time period, we see art that is totally abstract, meaning it's not meant to perfectly represent a thing or an object in the real world. And then we have representational art, which would be like a drawing of a person. That's a representation of a human being, perhaps even the representation of a very specific human. And when it comes to our representational art, we can have kind of this sliding scale of very abstract to all the way to very, very naturalistic. So I think one amazing example of something that's pretty abstract and yet representational would be looking at the plug on the wall here in the United States. This is what our plugs look like. And I don't know about you all, but when I was younger, I always thought these looked like little human faces making a little surprised face. So our brains are really hardwired to recognize human faces and human shapes, and to interpret even very abstract things like smiley faces and emojis into abstract ideas and concepts. And so when we look at art, we can have artwork that ranges from really abstract to very, very naturalistic. And it's important for us not to have value judgments on very naturalistic art. I know many people might view something that's incredibly naturalistic and think that it's somehow more advanced or better than something that's more abstract. But when we're looking at art, it's very important for us to look at what the intention is behind the art piece, because in some places it might be more beneficial to depict something in a very abstract way, and in other cases, maybe making something more naturalistic is going to make more sense. But Olmec art is very much revered for its high levels of naturalism when it comes to rendering human beings, which is something that we see in other cultures like the Benin Ife heads in Nigeria. We see that with classical Greek and Roman sculpture, and also Renaissance sculptures. We see that pursuit of high naturalism, and we do see that in Olmec art sometimes as well. So some of the most famous and most recognizable works of Olmec art include altars and also human heads. We'll be looking at some of these very large stone so-called altars in this lecture, but it's important for us to know that these altars were probably actually used as thrones. When they were first uncovered, they're these really large megalithic forms with these rulers kind of emerging from these cave-like niches. But we've looked at other depictions of rulers sitting on thrones, and now scholars are pretty sure that these so-called thrones that we see in Olmec art are probably, these altars are probably actually thrones. One of, again, the most recognizable forms in Olmec art are probably these colossal human heads. This is an example of one of the, I believe, 17 of these colossal human heads, head sculptures that have been discovered in the region of Oman and beyond. This one is from Tres Zapotes in Mexico. This is one of the sites that we'll be investigating in this lecture. So this shows you just how large these heads are. And another really curious practice that we'll discuss in this lecture is the fact that many of these works of art were intentionally, very intentionally buried by the Olmecs. So Olmec colossal heads are one of the culture's most well-known artistic contribution. When the first of these heads was first discovered, it was thought that they maybe were representing some sort of gods or deities. However, the consensus among scholars today is that they're probably portraits of rulers. One of the reasons why we think that they are individual portraits or representations of individual people are the fact that all of them bear unique facial features. Although they are in some ways kind of idealized, they all are somewhat youthful looking and don't have any, blemishes or scars. All of these faces are probably representing an individual ruler rather than a god. All of them are wearing some sort of helmet or headgear, which also could be protective headgear for the Mesoamerican ball game, which is another cultural contribution which probably came from the Olmec culture. And they just really draw people in with their huge size and the kind of psychological weight that these kind of serenely gazing faces have on people today, but also the kind of power and influence that these faces would have communicated back in their original culture as well. The colossal heads really distinguish Olmec art from other works of art across Mesoamerica. We really don't see any other cultures create large, like colossal size portraiture like that on that kind of scale, even much later. But other than just those colossal heads, we also see this larger interest in depicting the human form, the human body, the human face throughout Olmec art. And we really will see that continue on to some of the cultures that follow after. So we see wooden busts, greenstone masks, and other such figures that are really going to focus on the human face. And we'll talk about some of these sculptures in a little bit as well. So many of the objects that we associate with the Olmec culture are imbued with a certain kind of probably ritual or religious power. This is a jade ceremonial axe. It was one of the largest ever found in Central America, and there have been around a dozen of these ceremonial axe heads discovered from the Olmec time period. More than half of this axe, you can see that from the side it kind of has that wedge shape of an axe head. So almost half of the whole axe head is devoted to this face. And here we see this open kind of toothless mouth that has these interlocking fangs. We see kind of these closely set slanting eyes, a broad nose. We see that the hands down below are holding onto either a miniature version of itself or a knife. And we also see kind of schematic drawing of the feet down at the bottom. But this is another example of emphasis on the face. We see much more detail and attention and even space being reserved for the face of this creature. It's called the Coon's axe because it was acquired by a man who actually worked for Tiffany and Company in New York. His last name was Coons, and he was the original owner, or the original modern owner of this axe. But it was not until 1955, after several seasons of excavations at La Venta, that we saw other fine objects similar to this, that scholars realized that it belonged to this so-called Olmec culture. The radiocarbon dating there placed them in the first millennium BCE, and it was owned at the turn of the 20th century by Frederick Coons of Tiffany's in New York. And so this one's approximated to be between 1000 and 800 BCE. And you might be wondering what on earth is going on with that face. So what exactly is going on here? Well, stylistically, jade is a very, very hard stone. It needed to be carved with other hard stones, such as jade again. And it probably used jade, or the artist probably used jade powder as an abrasive. You can even see the corners of the corners of the mouth were carved out with a drill. And some of the facial markers that we're seeing here seem to combine human features with jaguar features, which kind of gives us the sense that this is probably some sort of supernatural being or transforming being. Oftentimes these are associated with probably representing an Olmec deity. So jaguars are the largest cat species in the Americas. They're also the third largest cat species in the world. And when we look at a jaguar snarling, we see that they have these very similar interlocking fangs, and the sides of their mouth kind of curl open like that. A little bit like this face here, which also kind of looks like a crying baby to some people. So we get this term in art history and archaeology relating to these types of faces or depictions that combine jaguar features with human features as were-jaguars. So this describes, again, these figures, and the prefix were comes from the Old English were, which means man. That's also where we get the word werewolf. So again, we're not sure exactly what's going on with this figure, but it's probably undergoing some sort of transformation, or it's some sort of powerful being that is harnessing both the power of a jaguar and also probably the wisdom and communicative skills of a human being as well. We see something called pars pro toto, which can be seen in Olmec art. This is a concept that the depiction of one part can stand in for a whole. So we'll see other examples where we'll have, like aspects of a figure that have jaguar qualities or crocodilian properties as well, or flames. And this gives us the impression that somehow that figure is steeped in or possessing some of the same attributes as that animal or idea. So who are the Olmec? The term Olmec comes from the Nahua word, which refers to people from the rubber country. This refers to a art style and a culture, a group of people, and they lived on the Gulf Coast between about 1200 and 400 BCE. These great cities along the Gulf Coast create a region known as Oman, although we do find Olmec works of art outside of this region as well, which shows that they were very good at trading with their neighboring regions. And Olmec is oftentimes considered by art historians and archaeologists to be a mother culture. And by that we mean it is the oldest known civilization in Mesoamerica. And by civilization, I just mean, groups of people who are living in cities rather than small villages. It's considered a mother culture because of all of these different technologies and aspects of religion and culture that we see exemplified in Olmec architecture and art that we also see later in, say, the Maya and Aztec art and culture. So we do have evidence of the Olmec creating rubber balls, and by rubber balls I don't mean like inflatable rubber balls, I mean solid rubber balls that they would play in ball courts. This will be a very important aspect of Mesoamerican culture that we will see repeated throughout some of these different cultures. We have some of the earliest examples of pyramid structures being built in Mesoamerica under the Olmec culture. We also see bilaterally symmetrical plans for ceremonial centers and cities. We see their love for jade working, mirror making, and interest in human form, including portraiture and depiction of anthropomorphic deities. These are all concepts and practices that we will see repeated in other following cultures. This is an example of some pretty exemplary jade work from the Olmec culture. This one is now at the Brooklyn Museum, but it's a standing figure holding a supernatural effigy. So we have this highly naturalistic human form holding onto another one of these kind of potentially like were-jaguar babies, which could be, they have been interpreted as probably being some sort of supernatural being. We also get the concept of civilized life from the location of the Olmec. Some of the first Olmec cities were built as man-made earthworks above swampy areas. And this is where we get the word Altepetl, which refers to water mountain, and later on in Maya glyphs and even in Teotihuacan, we will see the symbol of a mountain coming up out of a swamp as usually representing a city or a civilization or a particular location. So we do get this earliest manifestations of civilized life here with the Olmec culture. So when we zoom out and look at where the Olmecs were located on this map, we have them right here along the Gulf Coast. So some of the most important sites we'll look at today are Tres Zapotes, San Lorenzo, and La Venta. And these are all in this kind of lowland jungle area along the Gulf Coast. And as early as 1800 BCE, we do see population growth and agriculture in this region. We see this oftentimes kind of accentuated by the domestication of plant agriculture, which fueled this civilization. This is an example of corn, also known as maize, and it was developed and selectively bred from its ancestor, which, as you can see, is much, much smaller than what we have today. We have corn, which one plant can produce multiple ears of corn, which makes it very important for feeding large groups of people living together in a civilization. So this is teosinte. It is the ancestor of our modern day corn. And here we can see some of its transition into maize, and now you can buy all sorts of different kinds of corn at the seed stores, and you can kind of find the sweetest corn usually at most grocery stores. So again, the important sites that we'll look at today, we're going to zoom into this area known as Oman, are going to be San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. Here we have the Tuxtla Mountains, and this is where a lot of the granite and stone used at some of these other ceremonial and civic centers is going to be transported all the way from these mountains. And the first major site that we'll look at is San Lorenzo. It is the earliest known great Olmec center. It was probably at its height before 1000 BCE, so it's, again, that earliest known Olmec center. Here we have an earthen platform at San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, which massed about 9.4 million tons. It rose 164 feet above the swamp. It would kind of raise those more sacred shrines above the floodplain, so kind of highlighting its importance. And here at this site, we even have evidence of social zoning discovered by Anne Cyphers, in which elites occupy these central spaces. So think like the high-rise apartments in New York, and then the people who have fewer skills are pushed to the margins, or kind of these suburbs outside of these really important ceremonial centers. So here we have the plan of San Lorenzo, and we do have a man-made outline of the site that might have been intended to resemble a great bird-like monster, but that's kind of unclear if that's exactly what it's supposed to represent. One of the things that, again, San Lorenzo is best known for is the discovery of 10 colossal stone heads, which is, again, the majority of these massive stone heads that have been discovered so far have been discovered here at San Lorenzo. These heads were carved from basalt, which was imported around 60 miles. So 60 miles by the way the crow flies, 60 miles from Sintepec, sorry. And this is very, very impressive because, especially when we remember that Mesoamericans did not domesticate any beasts of burden. So who would be dragging these giant blocks of basalt to be carved into these human heads? People. People would have had to probably move these blocks on big sledges or roll them over logs, kind of like a conveyor belt. And then they would have probably been transported on rafts down the rivers. And all of these colossal heads were seemingly intentionally ritualistically buried. So let's get into it. We're here at San Lorenzo. As you can see, there's a lot of rivers, and this little wavy green line shows where the basalt was sourced to. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about how these heads were carved and how they were transported, I actually watched a National Geographic little, I don't know, it was like maybe a 20-minute video that's pretty new, on YouTube, and it shows people doing experimental archaeology, which is where archaeologists will take the kinds of tools and materials available to a group of people at a historical time, and they will try to replicate what those ancient people did using those same tools to see what's viable and what can work. So if you're interested in how those basalt blocks were moved, check it out. It's a National Geographic special on San Lorenzo. So this shows Stonehead number 5 in its original location. So you can see that it was very intentionally buried right here. Here's another one of the colossal heads from San Lorenzo. This one is colossal head number 1. So as we're looking at these images of these rulers' heads, I want you to notice the unique headgear each of them wears, the unique facial features, these highly naturalistic elements like these smooth folds of skin, the kind of intention to detail with the vermilion line on the lips, kind of these deep set eyes that show kind of a sense of serenity, but also this sense of sternness and power, which is probably what these heads were meant to communicate to people. So some of the identities is thought to be wrapped up in the headdresses. So the Olmec may have inserted identifying symbols on the headdresses of their highest ranking elite. We see other Mesoamerican cultures include like identifying markers on headdresses later in Mesoamerican history. So we're not sure exactly if these different headdresses are representing specific clans or families, or if they're representing titles or positions. But again, they're all a little bit different, but they're aesthetically very similar. But you can tell when we kind of look at them all in a row that these do seem to be representing real people and also different individuals with slightly different facial features. These faces are always given the most attention by the artists. They are really intentional about each aspect of the face, a little bit of this furrowed brow as well. Again, each face is unique, also a little bit idealized. They're shown youthful, they're not really wrinkly or anything like that. And the sides of the heads in which we see ears, ornaments, and these like side protective pieces of their headgear, this is where we see less detail, less attention to detail by the sculptors. So for example, this is the colossal head number 6, and you can see how the head, the face is super naturalistic, but in many ways it's a little bit squished to meet the dimensions of the boulder from which it was carved. So the backs of the heads are pretty variable. Some of them are kind of flat, some of them are a little bit more rounded, some are pretty minimally sculpted, and some of them actually have fringed feathers trailing down the back as well. So we see the difference in headgear styles here. So we have colossal head 6 and colossal head number 4, so different individuals with these slightly differentiated pieces of headgear. So one really interesting thing that we see in pretty much all of these Olmec heads is evidence of purposeful drilling into them. And you might think, oh my goodness, who could possibly want to destroy or recarve such incredible works of art? This is San Lorenzo head number 2. It's one of the most kind of intentionally destroyed in ancient times of any of these heads. So we will get into that in just a moment, but it's possible that these heads were reformed into other things after the death of the ruler, or after perhaps a societal shift in power, possibly just to refashion this very precious stone that took so much effort to transport there into something else without having to drag this huge chunk of basalt from the mountains 60 miles away. So the heads are assumed to be male by most folks, but a lot of them really don't have any gender specific features, so it's hard to say exactly who these heads are supposed to be representing. Scholars have explored evidence for female authority among the Olmec in their presence in monumental sculpture over the past 2 decades. So it's hard for us to assume the gender of any of these heads, although, again, earlier scholars kind of assumed that they were male. But I'll show you later on in this lecture a ruler that has probably been identified as female in one of our geoglyph carvings. So along with the attention to detail of human heads, we also see Monument 34 from San Lorenzo has not only, not just like the heads where somebody started to drill away and refashion it, but we actually see that the arms and head have been lopped off of this sculpture rather intentionally. So again, this is Monument 34. We can see this very dynamic pose in which this figure is kneeling. It seems like it was meant to be viewed from multiple angles, unlike the heads, which were really frontal. So this leads us to the question of why were so many of these sculptures purposely disfigured at San Lorenzo? So the theories are perhaps a ritual killing of the object or people or ideas that they embody. We do see this in other ancient cultures where in Sumerian cultures, Egyptian cultures, sometimes after one ruler's death, if their reign was looked at disfavorably, or if a new family or political entity comes into power, sometimes they will ritually deface the images of their predecessors. So that could be something that was happening. However, most scholars seem to be more of the opinion that these large and very valuable chunks of stone were probably being recycled or reused into creating new things. Again, just because of the fact that the basalt needed to be imported from around 60 miles away. But we actually do have some evidence that the heads were once thrones, or that the thrones were being transformed back into heads, and we'll talk about that right now. So head 7 has a deep niche carved into the side. Head 7 is pretty carved away. Monument 14 over here on the right is also in the process of, or at the time of its discovery, was also in the process of being destroyed. So this leaves scholars to think that maybe they were transformed one into the other, like maybe a ruler sits on a throne and then after their death, they get a portrait carved out of them, out of their throne, or vice versa. So there's a lot to be discovered here with the Olmec art and culture. Here we have a drawing which shows us this earthen platform that was designed here at San Lorenzo. It had a well drilled into it. It also had very intentional draining systems to make sure that this earthen structure didn't erode away. And it's inside of some of these platforms that we find these intentionally buried works of art. So this is where we see Monument 14, this toppled throne. We also see Monument 52 here, which has been interpreted as being a statue of a rain god placed at the top of a fountain. The basalt drains controlled the flow of the water on the earthen mound, and it went right by this effigy of what's probably a rain god. Notice the kind of were-jaguar type mouth, these big open, slightly slanted eyes. And then we'll talk more about this headdress, but this the rain gods are often associated with creating these offerings burned to create rain, which is where people would take strips of paper, cover them with rubber, fold them into this kind of crinkly pattern, which is what we see here, and then they would light them on fire as an offering to the rain god. And the idea was that this thick, tarry smoke that would come off of that rubber would meet up with the clouds and the rain god and bring rain down on the people. Another very interesting work of art. This was a sculpture that was discovered 31 miles from San Lorenzo. It was used in modern times to prop up a chicken coop. However, it has been assessed by archaeologists and art historians, and it's thought to probably be an Olmec wrestler. It's definitely in the wheelhouse of that Olmec aesthetic design to create this wrestler. It might not actually be a wrestler. It might be a ball player tying cloths around his waist to get ready for the ball game. Again, they played this ball game with solid rubber balls, so if that thing hit you, it would not just bounce off you like nothing, like a rubber ball we use today. It's 26 inches tall. And the figure is kind of unique for having this mustache and this little beard. And it has a lot of attention paid to its three-dimensional form, which is something that we also saw being exemplified in Monument 34, where we have this very dynamic pose, but we have a more complete dynamic pose here with the wrestler or ball player. From Veracruz here in the 12th to 6th century. Another impressive set of sculptures attributed to the Olmec culture are these two nearly identical early formative sculptures, again discovered near San Lorenzo. Here we have those folded piece of paper adornments that are associated with those Mesoamerican rain gods. And when we look at these two sculptures that look almost identical to each other, those who are familiar with the hero twins of Maya culture might see some connection there. So it's possible that those hero twins of the Maya early origin stories may have originated with the Olmec culture, but again, it's hard to say because we haven't broken the code to understanding the Olmec written language. So the Maya origin story was told in the Popol Vuh, and it tells of two hero twins. And these headdresses, again, are related to Mesoamerican rain gods. I know sometimes when people look at these, they think, wow, those look like Egyptian headgear, but they're not. We do see, and we will see throughout this class, headgear like this associated with those Mesoamerican rain gods. So we have evidence that San Lorenzo had trade with distant realms. They imported materials which are not readily available at their site, like mica, jade, and serpentine. And we also have evidence that they were probably trading resources that they had available to them, which are rubber and also tropical feathers, specifically from probably the quetzal, which is this beautiful bird that has these shimmering green iridescent feathers. The male bird only produces 2 of them at a time, and we see these feathers very much valued across Mesoamerica, especially in the high country where they don't have access to these tropical materials. All right, the next site we'll look at is La Venta. It's a little bit closer to the coast here at the Gulf of Mexico. It occupied a small island in the Tonala River. It was occupied for 400 to 500 years. La Venta is very important because it is the first pyramidal structure that we see created in the Americas, and the site here was very much oriented on a north-south axis with bilateral symmetry. Also at La Venta, we have 4 colossal heads that have so far been discovered. And this is the La Venta Pyramid Mound C1, which is what it's called. And of course, now it's looking a little bit more like a mountain, but it's very clearly man-made. And it probably originally had more architectural elements on it, but it's definitely required a lot of human power to create this pyramidal mound. Mound C1 rises 105 feet from its base. And again, its center is on north-south axis, about 8 degrees west of magnetic north. So this very intentional civic design lends us to believe that there's a lot of intention with astrological systems and kind of understanding those directions as well. So we find some very unique things here at La Venta. So just like at San Lorenzo, we do see ritually buried, intentionally buried works of art. We see these interesting mosaic pavement effigies that are intentionally buried. And we also have Stela 25 through 26, which is thought to have some Olmec numbers carved on it as well. But let's talk about some of these offerings of serpentine blocks. So at La Venta, we have 5 offerings of 50 tons of serpentine blocks each in a mosaic format here. They were all covered almost immediately after their creation under about 20 feet of clay, and they've been interpreted as perhaps representing faces, maybe representing shields, or even textile patterns. So this one, when you look at it from the front, it kind of looks like a mouth, nose, maybe some sort of eyes here. But these kind of tassel-y edges have also led scholars to believe these might represent cloth. This is Colossal head number 1 discovered at La Venta. It is approximately from 1800 BCE. And this helmet has giant talons on it. The raw stone is also from the same location that San Lorenzo was sourcing. And this really underscored the power of rulers to move mountains to have these done. Altar 4 is also from La Venta. This, again, was probably actually a throne. And here we see this classic Olmec throne where we have a ruler or some sort of human figure emerging from this cave-like niche. In this situation, we have the ruler holding onto a rope, which is attached to two-dimensional captives on either side. So it's showing that this individual is very strong and powerful and can control captives. We also have a lot of connections in later Mesoamerican cultures with caves being associated to portals to the underworld and also kind of emergence into the physical world that we live in. This is an Olmec painting that shows a ruler sitting on a throne, which looks kind of similar to this altar/throne. Again, that's why we think this is probably actually functioned as a throne and not an altar. Altar 5 from La Venta shows a similar figure emerging from this cave-like niche. This time it's holding on to a infant-like figure. On the side, we also have these adult-shaped figures carrying these smaller individuals as well. They're thought to be supernatural children, or perhaps they're presenting their heirs. When we look at Olmec depictions of children or these very small figures, oftentimes they embody both very childlike and also very much older features, which make them very puzzling. It has been compared in your textbook to how in Western art we sometimes see baby Jesus shown as both an infant but also like weirdly old and wise at the same time. So perhaps there's something like that happening here where they're not supposed to be representing regular children, but perhaps something more supernatural. Stela 3 from La Venta is important because it shows us background images. So it shows us that this is probably a recording of a historical event and that the location that this happened is probably pretty important. This is the actual stela photographed on the right. On the left, we have a reconstruction drawing. Here we also have another bearded figure. The wrestler that we just looked at, he had a beard. This figure has a beard. Typically in the Americas, indigenous people don't grow beards quite as commonly as other places in the world, but we do have examples of people who do grow beards, and we have examples of them in ancient art in the Americas as well. Here we have some very fantastical headdresses on these individuals, again, kind of leaning into that idea that we see steeped throughout Mesoamerican history, where these headdresses are signifiers of identity and office of individuals. This one's also unique because it is the first known example of a stela carving. A stela usually just means some sort of flat, large rock slab that is placed upright in the ground. Typically, they are very public markers. In today's society, a gravestone would be like a small version of a stela, or perhaps like a plaque in a park, something like that. But this is the earliest known stela carving in Mesoamerican history. Another very interesting work of art from La Venta is called Offering 4, and it is this tableau of these human figures carved out of jade and other greenstones, and just one of them is carved out of granite. We also have these celts on the outside. These celts are little axes surrounding them as well, which kind of puts this tableau in an architectural setting. So it's interesting for us to find a cache of these figures all worked together in one, again, kind of tableau, because a lot of times we find like the jade masks and other jade works from Olmec culture scattered across Mesoamerica, not in their original setting. And so this is important because it shows us that many of these small figures were probably meant to be seen and exist within a set, perhaps to remind people of an event or to confirm some sort of action or decision that was made at that time and at that place. When we look at these figures, you may notice that their heads are kind of long and flat. This actually is still naturalistic. It is still representing something in real life. Many of these ancient Mesoamerican cultures, the elites would practice head binding, which is where you bind a baby's head. And so it's before it's pieces of cranial skull chunks fused together, it can kind of be manipulated. So we do see that in some elite circles in Mesoamerican culture. So why were so many Olmec sculptures purposefully buried? I know in our world, we usually think of people creating art to be seen and appreciated. However, that's not always the case with other cultures and their intentions with creating works of art. So Offering 4 was buried and then dug up about a century later and then buried again, which perhaps shows us that these works of art were unburied, perhaps to remember or reconfirm an important event or an important person, and then they were kind of ritually buried back under the earth after this systematic revelation. Some art historians have wondered if this is supposed to be some sort of transformation or if it's supposed to represent a death of an object. Death of an object would be, for example, the monument with its head and arms chopped off. Perhaps it was meant to take power away from that object and then ritually bury it. That could be a possibility. And it's important for us to remember that art in the ancient world was often not created for visual enjoyment by humans, but often as offerings to deities or even rulers. So the way that different cultures use and appreciate art it's not always the same as our current understanding of art. All right, the next site we'll look at is Tres Zapotes. It is the first Olmec center to be discovered in the 19th century. So it's one of the earliest ones that people have been studying. Tres Zapotes survived into the late Formative period. And here we have the discovery of two colossal heads that are slightly smaller than the ones found at San Lorenzo and La Venta. This is one of these earliest discoveries of these monumental stone heads in the 19th century. And just to compare the size of some of these other monuments that we've looked at from San Lorenzo, these ones are still huge, but quite a bit smaller than some of these other ones. Nearby at La Cobata, this massive head that was starting to be carved was abandoned, and this is like one of the largest ones. Although this area known as Oman, or the place of the people of the rubber trees, is typically limited to this area right along the Gulf Coast, and we do have evidence of Olmec centers very much beyond this location of Oman. These sites of Teopantecuanitlan and Chalcatzingo were far from Oman, but established places of pilgrimage and ritual. So we see that the Olmec were this very far-reaching culture, although there's typical like homelands are right here along the Gulf. So at Teopantecuanitlan, we have this very large courtyard, which features 4 very large monolithic Olmec deities. These deities probably outline the 4 corners of the universe. And when we look at their faces, we again almost immediately recognize that so-called were-jaguar look that we see in depictions of Olmec supernatural beings. So we have the open mouth, the kind of wide, slightly slanted eyes, and these are thought to represent some of these different deities in Olmec culture. Next, let's look at Cerro Chalcatzingo. This is this natural outcropping of rocks that was carved by the Olmec people in the Middle Formative era. So let's take a look at what we have here. Here we have a supernatural feline with flame eyebrows, which is exerting its will over this human captive that's crushed beneath it. At the top, we see this S scroll, which across Mesoamerican cultures has been used to indicate clouds. This very supernatural being seems to exhibit properties of more than one different animal. So we have this feline body with kind of this bird of prey beak. And the flamed eyebrows is a motif that we see throughout Olmec depictions of supernatural beings. This petroglyph number 1 is an example of a ruler that has been possibly identified as female by archaeologists. This ruler is wearing a skirt and this mantelpiece, which is often associated with clothing that women wear in these ancient cultures. And here we see that the ruler is sitting on a throne, which is similar to those altar thrones that we've seen throughout Olmec culture. These S clouds around probably symbolize clouds or like energy moving away from this being. And then up at the top, we have these very interesting glyphs. Here's a slightly better quality photo. On this individual's headdress, we can see quetzal birds. So remember I showed you the picture of those quetzal birds with their long, shimmery green tails. And quetzal feathers will be associated with rulership and authority throughout the Aztec world as well. Again, this probably is an identifying marker of this individual. So the oldest Mesoamerican paintings that we have access to have survived only in caves. This particular painting is from a cave in Guerrero. It was set 33 feet above the entrance to the cave. Here we see an Olmec lord wearing a green bird suit, sitting on a throne. This is a concept that we call kind of the X-ray technique, which is where these artists will show you the person's face underneath the mask or underneath the regalia. So we see this Olmec lord wearing the green bird suit. He's sitting on a throne, very similar to altar 4 at La Venta and the throne in petroglyph number 1 at Chalcatzingo. And they oftentimes show the rulers sitting on a jaguar pelt on top of the throne. So this is a very interesting depiction of these different qualities of bird, human, rulership, authority being embodied here. Again, jade and greenstone were very, very important to the Olmec people. We have many examples of jade masks that bear Olmec signatures on them. So many of these Olmec masks lack provenance, which don't really tell us much about their use. One of the masks in your book was found in a creek, which it may have been buried there as an offering. Some of the masks that we see have holes in them to see through, but many of them were actually not created as masks for living people to wear, but rather were probably part of deity assemblages or other such tableaus. So again, we see this emphasis on human head and face as a very important element in Olmec art. We also have this very famous greenstone work of the Lord of Las Limas, where we see this, again, this Olmec iconography of an adult holding onto this kind of supernatural baby-like figure. So this is the largest Olmec greenstone statue that we know of. It's about 9 inches tall, so it's not monumental, but it is made out of this really precious stone, serpentine and pyrite here. So on July 16th, 1965, in the Mexican village of Las Limas in Veracruz, 2 children found this figure. The brother and the sister were using this round greenish stone to crack open palm nuts, and they decided they wanted to take the stone home because it was pretty. So as they started to try to dig out this stone, they found this top of that it was actually a top of this statue of a human carrying this baby-like figure. The children and their families saw this, and being of the Roman Catholic Christian tradition, it was quickly hailed in the town as being this miraculous Madonna and child image. But of course, this is much older than Christianity because it's probably from about 1200 to 400 BCE. So when we look closely at this figure, we see the kind of weird jaguar type face, again, this kind of supernatural baby-like figure, and then an adult that has these really quite detailed carvings incised on their skin. So these lines on the face may indicate the use of paint or perhaps scarification or tattooing to decorate the skin. The infant in the lap, again, looks similar to these figures associated with Olmec supernatural beings. And here in this detail, I love how we can see just kind of how intense and expressive the eyes of this figure are, which include inlay a little bit as well. The incisions of designs on the shoulders and the knees of the adult figure are oftentimes interpreted as being supernatural faces, and this may relate to Olmec mythology or religious beliefs. Some scholars have attempted to identify these beings as part of a pantheon of Olmec deities or spirits, or some sort of manifestations of divine forces. Some of them are recognizable from other contexts, including kind of an earth spirit. Another one's been identified as the so-called Olmec dragon, and maybe the shark or fish monster that's oftentimes associated with Olmec spirituality. So this could potentially be some sort of cosmogram, but until we can really identify and interpret Olmec written works, it's a little bit hard for us to say exactly what these symbols represent. So unfortunately, because of how oily the soil is in the original region of Oman, we really don't have a lot of great surviving works of ceramics from the Olmec period there. However, the Olmecs and their art and their culture was widely spread and traded throughout their neighboring regions. And so we do have examples of Olmec ceramics in other areas. So many of these works of art seem to represent babies, but sometimes they look kind of more like combinations of baby-like figures, but with more adult-like faces or loose skin or other things like that, which make them quite puzzling to many people. Here's another example of one of these seated figures that has some of these kind of baby-like features, but also adult-like features. This is a seated figure dressed as a supernatural beast. It could be that Olmec, so-called Olmec dragon or crocodilian. So this figure seems to have its eyes covered or transformed by the flaming eyebrow motif. They are kind of overshadowed by this crocodilian or dragon type cloak, or perhaps it's this spiritual covering of them. The face kind of with the blank eyes covered by those flaming eyebrows and kind of the, I would say, slightly uncomfortable pose of this figure may indicate a sense of a trance state. This may represent somebody under some sort of trance, or perhaps being influenced by one of these deities or one of these spirits from the Olmec or the Olmec pantheon. All right. And we do have a lot of stylistic influence on Oaxaca and neighboring cultures. On the left, we have a carved rock outcropping that was actually discovered in El Salvador. This depicts an Olmec figure carrying a large bundle, so this may represent the Olmec traders who brought their ceramics, their jade, their art, their agriculture to other regions to trade for resources not available in Oman. And on the right, we have an Olmec petroglyph in the Chiapas region, depicting a man carrying a flowering bundle, which is perhaps signaling his trade from the Olmec people to neighboring regions, trading for agriculture, for domesticated seeds, other such potential like that. And so I would like to mention the Olmec writing system as we wrap up. 62 signs have been incised on a block of serpentine, which date to the 1st millennium BCE, which would make them the oldest and earliest writing system in the New World. This is an artifact of the Olmec civilization, and folks at Brown University are studying it. So there's a lot to be learned and to be researched and to be studied about the Olmec culture, and work is being done to try to decipher the Olmec writing system, which is perhaps the forerunner or the parent to more complete writing systems such as the Maya writing system. So it seems as though the Olmec society either weakens or collapsed around 400 BCE. However, we do see its influence on later cultures. We see the Maize gods, the Mesoamerican pantheon, the Maya hero twins. We will see the spread of the rubber ball game across cultures, further developed writing systems as well after this formative or pre-classic period of the Olmecs. Some scholars have determined that the Olmecs maybe didn't collapse at all. Maybe they just evolved into other cultures or moved out as well. It's hard to say exactly what happened to them, At this point, again, there is a lot of work and research to be done to answer some of our questions about who the Olmecs were, if they were the direct, like, genetic ancestors of some of these other cultures, or if they were kind of their own people group. Those things are not yet definitively known in the academic world. However, I do want to end this lecture with a reminder that you do have an opportunity to see a scale model of one of these great Olmec heads here in California in San Francisco. So El Rey was carved by Ignacio Perez Solano. It is 9 foot tall, it weighs 14 tons, and this piece was given to the City College of San Francisco in 2004 by the Veracruz governor, Miguel Aleman Velasco. And there are 4 of these life-size Olmec replica heads in the United States today, but this is the one that I think you'll probably be more likely to go see. So again, this head is an accurate reproduction of the original piece from San Lorenzo in Veracruz, Mexico. The 3,000-year-old original basalt head is believed to be a portrait of a ruler from this ancient civilization. And this stone, again, was transported over 50 miles to where the original head was discovered. So remember, for my class, you do have the opportunity to earn extra credit if you go visit a museum or visit a work of art or architecture. And if you go to visit the El Rey Olmec head in San Francisco at the City College, you can definitely write a little write-up about it, maybe take a selfie with it, and you could turn it in for your extra credit opportunity. I would also like to just briefly address that many people who look at Olmec art have noticed similarities to ancient Chinese works in jade, or perhaps there are people in the world who see the Olmec heads and say that this is evidence that there were Africans in Mesoamerica. And I did just want to remind everybody that there is quite a bit of ethnic diversity within Indigenous people of the Americas. And a lot of Indigenous people from around this region do have very similar facial features and attributes that we see in Olmec art. And I think it's also important for us to ask ourselves, if we see works of art or architecture or technology in the Americas, why would we automatically assume that that inspiration or that knowledge or that technology came from somewhere outside of the Americas? And there have been no evidence of any of these claims. I mean, yes, when you study art from across the world and across cultures, you will notice different groups of people developing their own versions of pyramids and other such large-scale structures. You'll see different people developing the same technologies on their own timeline and for their own reasons. And I think it's just important for us to just realize that there's a lot of innovation, technology, and artistic achievement that we see in the Americas that really has nothing to do with what other people were doing across the ocean at the same time. And I'll close with that. Please remember, as you are reading in your textbook and looking at some of these works of art and architecture on the slides, to be thinking about what cultures or works of art or architecture you'd like to write your 2 papers on throughout the semester. So just keep an open mind when you're learning, and think about what you would want to learn more about. All right, I'll see you next time.